Now the third element, which is the fundamental issue of knowledge. The Austrian school treats this epistemologically, that the undisputable fact that human knowledge always will contain aspects of lack of unpredictability and indetermination. This produces involuntary effects, and these effects cannot be calculated ahead of time. So there are limits for the Austrians and the capacity of the human brain that keep it from understanding fully the complexity of social and economic phenomena. The formal systems have certain rules as to how they work and behavior rules that cannot be determined previously. It is the Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset said, "The eye cannot see itself except before a mirror." Since it's not possible to quantify all our knowledge, the Austrian school does not analyze markets in a state of equilibrium, but as processes, in a process of discovery and expression of knowledge that normally in the real economy are silent, hidden, spread out, and not connected, hoping that human intelligence, the subjective human intelligence, will exhibit them, organize them, and articulate them. This third nucleus hypothesis of the Austrian school, for several people who study epistemology, is the most important. However, we'd rather consider it equal to the first two, because we believe that it would be easier to highlight the interactions and interdependence between the three. This basic nucleus of the Austrian school is so important that it allows us to define economics as human action in the marketplace over time under conditions of genuine uncertainty. Now, the elements of propagation, or the elements of propagation. First of all, marginal utility. This is not unique to the Austrian school. This is the concept that was the correct answer, found in 1871, discovered separately by three different economists, which is the issue of value, which was defying people that were studying economic science since St. Thomas in the 13th century. 600 years after the Summa, Karl Menger, Walras, and Jevons, and the first in Vienna, the second in Lausanne, and the third in London, realized that the value of a good or a service is determined by its marginal utility in each moment of time. That is, that value depends on a combination, a simultaneous combination of utility and scarcity. So despite the fact that the concept is introduced in economic theory by all three of them, each one of them developed this concept according to their own convictions. Menger, the father of the Austrian school, had a subjectivist opinion. Walras is the forerunner of the general equilibrium school, and Marshall, the father of the partial equilibrium, treated it more mathematically, since the concept of marginal or additional goods and services fit in with the apparatus of the differential calculation. So for the Austrians, the principle of marginal utility, action in dynamic time, and subjectivism are inseparable. The second propagation element is subjectivism. In the Austrian school, it's not limited to the subjective value theory or the perception that the theories that lead with the human field are personal, therefore not subject to testing. Austrian subjectivism refers to a basic presupposition that the content of the human mind and the processes of decision-making that characterize our choices or actions are not determined in a rigid way by external events. Thus, subjectivism emphasizes creativity and autonomy of individual choices. and thus is subordinated to the methodological individualism. That concept that the market results can be explained in terms of individual choices. For the Austrians, economic theory should consider as a priority the collection of facts that explain choices and not be limited to interactions between objective variables. So subjectivism analyzes human action, remembering that this action always occurs under conditions of genuine uncertainty, which is not measurable, and that it happens over the period of dynamic time. When a particular economic agent chooses a course of action, the results of his choices will depend on the course of action that were executed and that can potentially be executed by other individuals. If autonomy is the predominant factor in individual decisions, this means that the future is not only not known, but that it cannot be known or learned. The third element of propagation are spontaneous orders. The intermediate classes of phenomena related to praxeology. They are institutions that exist in between instinct and reason. They are a result of human action, but not the execution of any human plan or human design. The Greek thinkers looked at two different types of phenomena that correspond to the terms introduced by the sophists during the 5th century. Physei, which means by nature, and thesei, which means by deliberate decision. For the Austrians, however, this dichotomy is not, does not fit with the social sciences. Hayek said in The Counter-Revolution of Science, Studies on the Abuse of Reason, some type of order appears as the result of individual action, but it's not intentional by any individual. Examples of this are the monetary system, markets, and cultural and linguistic manifestations. The economics of the real world, ever since people understood that they could have advantages through this process of trade, is a giant spontaneous order, similar to the universe, where there's always forces of expansion and contraction and expansion. This is why the Austrians call it market economics, what I think is an ugly word, a catalactic.
Podemos passar, então, para o primeiro campo, que é a
filosofia política. Now, political philosophy. Political philosophy of the Austrian School should be seen as an attempt to understand and explain the history and institutions, social institutions, in the light of natural limits to the human knowledge. As Raimondo Cubedo, Italian philosopher, wrote, history and social institutions often appear as an outcome of individual human actions focused on fulfilling subjective ends. Menger, Mrs. Hayek, and other Austrians were not just economists that dealt with the world of politics or people who dreamt about a better world of an utopian bias. They were also thinkers that designed the theory of the best regime based on the design of the human action and on the nature of society. The beginning of the modern times was marked by the emancipation of economics from ethics and politics. That is, based on the assumption that economics, differently from these other two fields of knowledge, would have a status of science. However, today, the debates about the best regime always come linked with economic issues. However, when the Austrians refused to accept the separation between economics from ethics and politics, the academics, in love with the promises of positivism, would not think so. When Austrians published their critique to socialism, warning that its adoption would end up generating chaos or tyranny, precisely because it would never be possible to bring together planning and freedom. These were lonely voices in the desert, as Saint John Baptist. In that first half of the 20th century, there was a general belief that the dangers pointed out socialism, pointed out by the Austrians, simply were not there, that the critique had only ideological motivations, and that it was a wrongly view of mechanisms that would enable growth of economies. And it's amazing that to the present day, after the huge failure of all socialist experiences, there is a predominance in the academic world, all over the world, of intellectuals that somehow have a socialist bias. Unfortunately, there are eyes that go much beyond Gasset's sentence, because these eyes just refuse to see, even before a mirror. And Brazil is an example of that, in Latin America in general, in the current time. Political philosophy is not a form of ideology and cannot be reduced to mere knowledge of history. And it's not just a simple expression of a class struggle. Political philosophy, it's a philosophical challenge guided by reason and experience in search of the best political regime. Summing up, this is what the Austrian school has always supported. The first topic now is critique to mixed systems. So based on the antithesis between spontaneous orders and directed orders, Hayek made an important difference between the norms of the political system and the institutional system. The first ones were nomos in Greek, which evolve in a non-deliberate way, in which the legal system go little by little in harmony with uses, customs, and traditions, thereby establishing the guarantees and basic individual rights. It's the common law. These norms should be the basis, the foundations for the law, because these are general rules about just behavior applicable to all in an equal way. And at the end of the day, they represent the cornerstone of the proposition that it's very important that the power of the state need and should be limited. On the other hand, the rules that are thesis-like are deliberate, designed, and planned in the positive law in order to obtain specific objectives in the interest of the power of the state and groups that are part of the state or that benefit from it. Examples of norms of the second time are the obligation of wearing sitting belts when you're driving, public budgeting, and taxes and tariffs. On the other hand, regarding economics, market economics would apply. You could apply the paradigm of cosmos, and for a planned economics, you could apply the paradigm of taxes. Law and economics, according to the Austrian school, are inseparable when you try to seek an appropriate social order. Cosmos nomos represents a social order in which prevails market economics ruled by fair behavior norms that meet the demands of common law. On the other hand, directed order could be summed up by the paradigm thesis taxes. And the main point here of the Austrian school by Hayek, Mises, and other authors is that the intermediate forms between these two orders, a little bit of a market economy and a more open political system as a controlled, at least partially by the government, as a social democracy, these are not feasible because they suffer from logical inconsistencies that are internal and that tend to fail.